Here's Mark and Suzanne revolutionizing radio.
Well, good morning and welcome to another exciting episode of the Mark and Suzanne Show. I am Mark. She is Suzanne, and we're glad to have her back on the show. She was absent last week, as you all might remember. She was out gallivanting around the country on other radio shows. We were fearful perhaps she was interviewing to have a show on another network and leaving this network. But lo and behold, that really wasn't what she was doing. As we said last week, we're glad when Suzanne gets these opportunities to be on other radio shows because it gives her a chance to promote what we're doing here at the Cerberus Radio Network, and at the same time be able to talk to a large audience of people about ideas perhaps they've never heard before. So we're glad you joined us again today. We've got another jam-packed show, as we always do. We've got a lot to talk about. Why? Because there's a lot going on. We've got a lot to talk about evil. Why? Because Washington, D.C. is still there. And if there is a representative example of evil incarnate, just drive over to that 10-mile square swampland we affectionately refer to as Washington, D.C., and you will be in Satan's den. Folks, it's evil over there, and we're going to take time today to really expose good parts of it. But there's a lot of evil going on, and it's time for people of goodwill, for the Christian community to emerge in this drama. We can no longer sit on our hands and just do a fantastic thing. We need to get engaged, to organize, be the force that we actually can be to bring about good, to bring about godliness. Folks, this is not hard. It seems hard because the mountain's very tall that we're trying to climb. But you know what? If we're all climbing together, a lot of good can be done. So I'm glad you joined us here on this Wednesday. By the way, you can join the program anytime you'd like by calling us at 717-467-1736. 746, and the producer extraordinaire of the Mark and Suzanne Show, Jeff Johnson, will pick up and he'll invite you onto the show, and we'll look forward to your comments. So like I said, I'm Mark. She is Suzanne. Welcome back, Suzanne. We're glad you're back in the saddle again.
Well, thank you very much. You know, last week I think we had a little bit of a scheduling issue where we forgot that we were going to put our show an hour later, so I was able to join my good friend on K-Talk Media out here in the Sandy, Utah area. It's a really good opportunity. They've got a significantly large audience. That's a benefit of terrestrial radio. Jeez. So the host of that morning show, Inside the News with Paul Jensen, is very generous on allowing us the opportunity to promote our show, to promote our network, and introduce, as you said, to a very large audience who is conditioned to listening to traditional messages on the mainstream media. And Paul's very like-minded, and there's very little we disagree on. But they hear some of the things that we have to say, and fortunately, it looks like some of them are following us over here. Principles of federalism versus nationalism, the difference that there is between the two. You know, I want to encourage people also that are listening that have come over there to follow us on Facebook. We are working on a website. We will get one up, so it's a lot easier for you to tune in. But right now, we can on facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. We also have a CRN fan page. We have an app. You can download it on the Google Play Store, and we have low bandwidth options we list on Radio Co. We are getting new shows. We have a YouTube channel as well. Like, share, subscribe. We don't advertise. We're trying to get some money together and make a, you know, like I said, a website so we can get this information out, make it easier. But right now, we depend on you, our listeners. We love the positive feedback. We really love the encouragement. We need you to share and get the word out. We have a new show. We have a new talent coming up. We're going to announce him on Monday. We're all very excited. It might not be a huge surprise, but when you're listening, for instance, on the Android app, listen to our shows 24/7. We have something really good going on. Jeff Johnson, our in-studio host right now, is the host of his own show, by the way, our producer. He has his own show called The Paradigm Shift. I have another one that I do also, The Wasatch Report. Another one I just started, Case in Point, where I select several Supreme Court cases. I'll do one per episode. I started with my first one with Marbury versus Madison, with Dr. Kevin Gutzman, a historian that we're all familiar with. And we are going to do DC, District of Columbia versus Heller. This is going to be another truth bomb that you're only going to hear on the Cerberus Radio Network, folks. All liberty, all the time. A lot of people think Justice Antonin Scalia was the textualist, the originalist. He understood the Constitution. Yesterday, after my article on that's going to be a companion to Case in Point, is going to explain how Scalia got constitutional originalism, the Second Amendment, the purpose and intent of it wrong in DC versus Heller. I also read his concurring opinion yesterday in McDonald, City of Chicago versus McDonald, and you're going to understand again how he botched it and incorporated, thanks to him and the National Rifle Association, the Second Amendment upon the states. People might think that's a good idea. On another show, we're going to explain why this has been a disaster, but let me leave you with this one thought. Never in the history of this union has it been more difficult to get a firearm. This is with, thank you, NRA, thank you, Republican president, thank you, 2 Republican houses of Congress. And I'll get into that a little bit more later on. Also, check out our other shows, The Other Side with Justin and Mike, 2 social studies teachers from a high school that have a really great perspective. And so we are very fortunate to understand that there are children that have teachers telling them the truth that we're trying to teach you here. Jeff, did you have any commentary on how it can be easier for people to listen? By the way, you are welcome to call in. I think Mark gave the number out, 717-467-1736 this morning.
Well, actually, yeah, folks, we're in growing pains right now. There's so many things that need to get done. We are trying to take this to the next level because this message is so important. None of us are getting paid. We're all spending a lot of money doing this, and trust us, that is not a complaint. I'm happy to do what I'm doing, because this message is so important. Because if we don't get this governmental thing right, and of course, we all agree that the heart is the most important thing. If our heart's not right, then everything else isn't going to be right either. But as far as this governmental thing, the consent of the governed for the English speakers out there, we are doing a lot. And yes, right now we're working on, it says on the Facebook page banner at CRN, use app. It used to take you to Google Store to get the app. Right now, it'll take, I hope it still works, that if you hit that use app, it'll take you right to Radio Co feed, and you'll hear the radio show right now live, what's going on right now. So if you can't find us anywhere else, hit that link there or hit the use app, and it should take you right to Radio Co. And we're working on other things too. Suzanne and everyone, we're behind the scenes. We're just busy as bees.
And so, as you know, we are playing in their playground, their rules. They change the rules on a whim. We really don't understand what's allowed, what is not allowed. I'm serving the final stretch of my 30 days in the hole on Facebook for posting again a comment that was very angry by a vegan who went to my page and said that I murdered animals for no reason whatsoever. I think feeding my children, my family and friends is a good reason, but what do I know? But I think it's awful to remove a clump of cells from a woman's body. When I shared that, I got 30 days in jail. And this woman had no sanctions whatsoever, nor did her boyfriend, who used every expletive to cuss me out. They have you pigeonholed, folks. They have a label on you. You can even go to your settings and find out where they view you politically. If you have certain demographics, there are some things that you will not get away with that other people will. So it really is unfortunate. But the interesting thing is the parties that have been demanding a free and open internet for the preservation of our democracy, meaning the big tech companies with net neutrality, are now the biggest censors out there. And at first, Mark, I was saying, well, they're private companies. They can do what they want, and it's up to us to find an alternative. But are they really private companies if you look at their connections and how they work in tandem with the government? I've had people tell me that the CIA has provided the seed money for Facebook in the first place. Look at how many times Mark Zuckerberg visited the White House when Obama was in office. Why would a member of a solely private entity visit the White House as many times as he did what was going on. So, you know, at what point does a company, because it becomes, I'm not even going to say successful, because I won't go with that argument. I actually heard somebody say, well, you know, if they get really successful and have a monopoly on getting the message out there, then the government needs to get involved. No, it does not. And these were conservatives out there, folks. But if we look at it from the issue that, you know what, this is actually synonymous to a government agency. So do we surrender? Do we say, well, government, we want you to regulate yourselves? No, we've seen how that works. I wish they would just get out of the government regulation of it entirely. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all of you people out there are not our nannies. Let us sink or swim on our own on Facebook. You know, it's just like the schoolyard playground when we were growing up. We didn't have someone standing right over our heads to keep us from shoving each other around. We dealt with it. We got our bloody noses, our skin knees, or whatever. We dusted ourselves off and we went on with our lives. But they're trying to take that experience away. And we're seeing that a lot on Facebook. Have you experienced that as well, Mark?
Well, sure. You know, this is an ongoing discussion, isn't it, with regards to what has happened here recently with the purge from Facebook. And, you know, we talk a great deal, or we hear a great deal about this this deep state. And so in reality, it's there. What is it made up of, though? Obviously, part of it is the intelligence agencies. They really are part of the deep state. It's really one of the good things that Trump is trying to do, is to expose how wicked these intelligence agencies truly are. But you know what? When you think about the Soviet Union, who were the real power brokers in the Soviet Union? Well, the intelligence community was. They knew a lot about everybody. We've talked about this a great deal in the past, Suzanne, and on other shows I've talked about this as well. You don't want government knowing a lot about you. Now, of course, the average conservative will respond, well, if I'm not doing anything wrong, then I have nothing to worry about. Yes, you do. You do have something to worry about with the government having any of your information. I hate this Social Security number. It started before then, but really we all became very comfortable and familiar with giving our private information to the government so we can track us. Well, guess what, folks? Because we're such compliant seals, we will jump up on the podium whenever they clap their hands, and then we'll clap our hands, and they say, get a Social Security number. Well, by God, we got to get our Social Security number. And guess what that does, though? It gives them access to where you are, where you work, how much you make, one simple number. Now, with the technology they have today, look at what they can get. They can get everything. They can get your bank account. They can get what you're saying on your phone. They can monitor this show. There is incredible amounts of evil that is going on because we willingly think it's cool to give the government our information, or we accept it. So one part of this deep state is indeed the intelligence community. The other part are crony capitalists, these people that use government for their own purposes and their own advantage. Facebook being one of them, but you can't take out GM either. You can't take out Chrysler. You can't take out a lot of companies that live off of the government. That's how they make their living, off of your tax dollars. And so there's this group of people that are in the crony capitalists, or major businesses, that have no problem sharing with Washington, D.C. information. They have no problem colluding with them because it fulfills whatever it is their final objective is. It fulfills that. So we're up against a lot of corrupt evil. Now, to Suzanne's point, and I think she's right, is Facebook truly free? Is the internet a free market? Well, not when you have this kind of collusion going on. But the answer can't be, as Suzanne just mentioned, it can't be, well, let's get the government to regulate it. That's a crazy answer, guys. The market can take care of these things. Now, granted, right now, the deep state has an advantage because they have control of a massively powerful government that can squash people. And so to a degree, we can't be ignorant of the fact this is a big battle. We truly are up against a Goliath here. But they were back in 1774 and 5 and 6, they were up against what was perceived to be a Goliath. Think of the Goliath of racism, of embedded racism that Martin Luther King was up against in the 1950s and 60s. Think about the embedded giant of a Goliath of reefer madness that states like Colorado and Washington had to confront when they started their move towards what ended up being recreational marijuana. Folks, there's always going to be a Goliath as long as there's government out there, because evil interests figure out how to get control of it. It's really not even hard for them to get control of it. All they have to do is recruit and then run a few megalomaniac elected officials, which I suspect we all understand there are plenty of those out there. There are plenty of megalomaniacs that wake up every morning and put on their shirt and tie and say, "Good morning, Mr. President." And they are psychologically problematic people, and they like to run for office. They like the title delegate or representative or congressman. They want that. They long for that. They define their lives by that. And so all it takes is the intelligence community or the crony capitalist to find those guys, recruit them. It's not hard to do. Just go to any one of your local VFW meetings. There's somebody that'll raise their hand and say, "Oh, I think I should run the government." And then you fund them, you get them on the ballot, they get elected, and they do your bidding. So it's really not hard what they do. And they're very successful at it. And so we have this Goliath in front of us. Granted, but as the Bible teaches, the Goliath in the scriptures in the Old Testament was taken down by 3 stones by a small boy. So we can't always be intimidated by this Goliath. Yes, Facebook is colluding with the federal government. No doubt about it. So is Twitter, so is Instagram, whatever other social media is out there. They're sharing data. The intelligence communities are connected with Facebook and these other places. All right, it's out there. We know that that's the fight. Now the question becomes, well, how do we slay our Goliath? How does that happen? Well, number one, we can look to history. History is actually filled with examples of how to do it. One of the great tools that has been used so far to prevent people from actually engaging in some of these tools that are available to us right there at our hands, folks, literally right there at our hands, has been a false kind of narrative about our own history and our own political processes and our form of government that we have. There's just been now whether that's been done by nefarious people or people that actually thought they were doing well, it's kind of immaterial. The bottom line is most people are unaware of the peaceful political tools that are available to us to slay this giant. And don't think for a moment that this giant doesn't need to be slayed. Washington, D.C. needs to slip right off into the Potomac. And what we need to do is line up some bulldozers right up there off of 16th Street in Washington, D.C. We need to line up about 4,000 bulldozers and just get them moving with their blades down southeast. If they do that, they will push Washington, D.C. right into the Chesapeake Bay or the Potomac River. It doesn't really matter to me which body of water they wind up in. But the bottom line is we need to push Washington, D.C. right off into that body of water, and it needs to just disappear. It needs to not be there anymore. It is a bad, evil empire there, folks. You cannot go down there and marvel at all the buildings and, oh, this is where it all began. Yeah, if you want to marvel at this is where evil began, then go on down there and visit and walk around like all the other tourists. I used to live there in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. And every year you can go down there in the summer, and well-meaning people are there, and they're just in awe. They stand up in line outside the National Archives, and they walk by the Constitution. And,
I did that. I
did too, Suzanne.
Everything but get on my knee and genuflect at that flipping Lincoln Memorial. God help me.
How long did you wait in line there at the National Archives? I'll tell you,
the funny thing is, we got there a half hour before it opened. I thought it opened at a different time, so we were first in line. And I see things differently now than I did even just a few years ago. The first time I went to the Gettysburg battlefield, I don't think I would feel the same way that I do now. I would have more of a sense of anger and remorse as opposed to reverence. But, when we talked about these megalomaniacs, you mentioned that earlier, that's not just in DC. We've got these little tyrant scumbags running all around it, from your local HOA director to your city governments. And here's a meme that a friend of mine sent me. I just have to read this to you. They call me the city planner because communist who dictates how everyone may or may not use their own property doesn't go over well in Utah. Isn't that the truth? These city planners telling us what we can do. I mean, I told you, I moved away to get out of the regulations, the taxes, the oppression that I felt in California. And I got a place in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. And I ended up getting a letter. First of all, we talked about this on your show on the other network when Trent and I substituted for you, filled in for you. And the American Community Survey. And the problem with the American Community Survey, it's authorized by the United States Census Bureau to take the number of people that are living in our homes and determine representation in the House of Representatives. They want to know how you heat your home, how many toilets you have, what kind of water faucets you have. Has anybody stayed in your home for more than 3 days? So if somebody has stayed in there, or 2 nights, they said, if somebody stayed in there for more than a long weekend, you're supposed to tell them. Have you sold any vegetable products from your home? Here's the nefarious one. Do you have trouble sleeping, dressing, or taking care of yourself? That is going to be linked right into this expanded background check on the gun controls. I had somebody else from the EPA, guy in Colville working for the Department of Conservation. They're just down the totem pole from the Environmental Protection Agency, trying to tell me what we can do with our creek and then a water tribute or water canal going through for irrigation canal at the top of the property, and what he's going to allow the local communities who have access to that water do. Can we pipe it, or do we have to leave it open and waste a lot of water? That was ultimately, he said, his decision to make. And I said, that's funny because I don't recall voting for you. And you mentioned also how they also take control under the auspices of our security. I remember, and I'm doing a little confessional here, the Patriot Act, when that came out after 9/11, I wondered, wow, what kind of world did I bring my boys into? And then I thought, well, thank goodness George Bush Jr. is in office. He'll take care of this. And when the Patriot Act came out, well, it's a bit unfortunate. They're going to read all our emails, but I've got nothing to hide in my emails. Mike Meharry had a great response. If you think that you have something to hide, if somebody gives you that argument, tell them that's fine. Why don't you make public, print out your browser records for the past year and see how comfortable you are with that. I don't care who you are. People aren't going to want to do that. So, we also talked about the misinformation going out. And right now, fortunately, I'm not seeing much of it, maybe because I blocked Dinesh D'Souza on Twitter. Maybe that is part of it. But there is an awful movie going out. And no, I haven't seen it. I'm not going to, and I don't think you are either. It was about Dinesh D'Souza's movie about Lincoln and Trump. And what is it called? Can This Nation Be Saved Again, or something like that? Death of Historical Accuracy is a little bit of a truth bomb that came out from the Abbeville Institute. Boyd Cathy wrote this, and this came out August 6th. Dinesh D'Souza's movie, Death of a Nation, Can We Save America a Second Time? I submit to anybody that knows real history and that hasn't been indoctrinated, Lincoln's War was the death of a voluntary union, this compact of sovereign and independent nations of their own coming together to form a union, a government with limited power. The states retained the most. Now, when you try to talk about secession, those that are hardcore conservatives are saying, well, Lincoln settled that, because all of a sudden it's acceptable to talk about secession when California wants to do it because they don't like President Trump. Our good friend Jeff says, nope, he's not going to watch it. We're getting some comments coming in. Our good friend Andrew is also commenting. You know, we're not getting a lot of phone calls, but right now I love the feedback that we're getting live. Andrew says, I took the same journey from statist Republican to Jeffersonian, weight off my shoulders, shedding the hypocrisy. And that's what we're trying to do, folks, too. Andrew did this on his own. He's a sharp guy, but there are a lot of people who fortunately are open-minded enough to hear what we have to say. At first, who's that crazy woman up there in Crestlands? You big dummy. Don't encourage her with this nonsense. But when people really think about it, what we're saying absolutely makes sense. How would we have a system by which we were founded upon a violent revolution? We seceded from England. Then we seceded from the Articles of Confederation, but all of a sudden, miraculously, secession and self-governance is no longer a principle that was revered in 1787. And this is what Mark and I are trying to tell people, that this Constitution was really a dubious act and not an act of liberty. In fact, there's an article out by Mises.org. I really like this one. It's really an excerpt from Albert J. Nock's book, Jefferson, Chapter 5. And he talks about how it's called Liberty versus the Constitution, the early struggle. Mark, you've been posting a lot about how some of the people that were actually there were vehemently opposed to this idea and the secrecy in which this new system of government was drafted before we even got to ratification. They shut the doors. They did this in secret. Well, why did they do that? I'm going to let you run with that a little. You've been talking about that a lot lately.
Yeah, and I think, what's so fun, Suzanne, for those of us who have been doing this for a while, is we're beginning to see this progression of thought happening. So when I started on the radio back in 2008, 2009, somewhere around there, you really couldn't even say the word secession without people getting just vehemently angry at you.
Texas v. White. Texas v. White.
Exactly.
The Supreme Court. The judicial temple monkeys, the black-robed high priests have spoken. Gosh darn it.
The oracles have spoken. That's right.
Cartoons.
And you couldn't even talk about it. Now, this is where my friendship began with my good friend Michael Bolden and Mike Meharry out there at the 10th Amendment Center, who Mike Meharry continues to think that you and I are dummies. But we'll talk about that another time. I am just jabbing my good friend. But here, back then you could at least talk about nullification. You could still talk about the 10th Amendment because it was part of this sacrosanct Constitution, this nearly divine document. So you could slip in nullification from time to time, but most conservatives would say, oh, that'll never happen. That'll never happen, blah, 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 blah. And now here we are in 2018, and we can openly talk about secession because California threatens to do it all the time. We can talk about nullification because Colorado and Washington and 30 other states are nullifying stupid federal law right now. And suddenly it's become permissible to talk about these founding principles. This is what excites me about where we are right now, Suzanne. We can actually have non-inflammatory discussions about founding principles. And this is the beginning of the end of Washington, D.C., if you ask me, because finally, we're, with the exception of, as you just described, the people like Dinesh D'Souza and the hyper, conservative spiritualists out there who believe that this nation is indivisible and it's under God and all this propaganda that's been out there. The bottom line is, shows like ours, podcasts like we're delivering are going to dominate the landscape going forward. There's an interesting article, and I just want to segue real quick for a moment, if I could, into this article. It just came out yesterday. The title of this article is over on physics.org. Is podcasts take growing role in shifting media landscape. I'll just read a couple paragraphs here. They're very short. As radio fades.
Which is why they're censoring it, by the way. Look at Alex Jones. If you don't like what he says, just wait. They'll get to you. If you didn't like the Confederate flag, guess what? They want the Jefferson Memorial. It's not going to stop. Okay, sorry. I just had to throw that in there.
This is what it says. As radio fades in the new world of digital media, podcasting has become hot. In less than 15 years, on-demand podcasts have become a key part of the media landscape that is luring advertisers to the market and is worth tens of millions of dollars and growing. According to Edison Research, 124 million Americans listen to audio podcasts, including 73 million on a monthly basis. Quote, podcasts are now getting to the point where they sit alongside other forms of premium media like video and books and television and music. Guys, we are on the cutting edge here at Cerberus Radio Network of expanding the discussion of the peaceful political tools that we have at our disposal to bring an end to this evil, corrupt, bipartisan, corrupt, morally bankrupt, I gotta say, maybe legitimate system of government in Washington.
We had an epiphany a couple weeks ago, didn't we?
Indeed. It's funny. I have to change that now because maybe it is functioning exactly the way it's designed to function. So, but nevertheless, morally, we cannot say it's a legitimate form of government. We cannot legitimize that evil thing there. And Christians, if you're listening today, knock it off. Stop having a First Commandment problem with that doggone Washington, D.C. Stop worshiping it. It is just filled with megalomaniacs who seek to do evil, evil things. Now, are there some good people there? Of course there are. There's 535 legislators there. You're bound to find one or two that have good motives up there. There's probably a million regulators up there. There's bound to be one good one up there. So, but seriously, you get the point. There's no doubt some good people up there in Washington, D.C., but by and large, these are evil, corrupt megalomaniacs who actually like coming into the office each day and figuring out how they can control you. I used to work there, folks. You've got to trust me on this. I was one of those megalomaniacs. Mark Kreslins, I was a megalomaniac up there. I acted that way. I showed you my golden boss card that said Mark Kreslins, working senior legislative assistant for Congressman Richard H. Baker or George Wortley, and I'd pass that card out, and I'd get on that phone, and I'd use the power of the office to do some things I should never have done. Folks, I was one of them, and I'm probably one of the least megalomaniacs up there, but I was a bad one, but I knew a lot of really bad ones up there, and they run things. And then we wonder why we're in the mess. So Christians, just knock off worshiping that area. You worship one thing. It is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That's who you worship. Don't put this doggone government, the Constitution, don't elevate it to the level of truth. It is not. As Suzanne said here recently, I've been asking some questions. Now, some people don't like me asking questions. They get mad at me. They get angry at me asking questions about the Philadelphia Convention, also popularly referred to as the Constitutional Convention. It wasn't. It was a coup, is what it was. Folks, you've got to understand what really happened there. None of this will make sense to you if you don't understand the summer of 1787 and what occurred there. If you think, like David Barton tells us, that this was really just some kind of a prayer meeting where they had some disagreements about representation, the big governments, the big states versus the small states, but they all got together after Ben Franklin's June 28th prayer, call for prayer, and they went to church that weekend, and they all prayed together, and then they came back on June 30th and got to work on the Constitution. There was a great spirit of unity in the convention, and out popped. If you think that's really what happened, then you're just listening to a guy who's making stuff up. Let me give you an example of this. There was actually a delegate. There was 77 were invited, ended up 36 of them signed the document. A lot of them just kind of disappeared or didn't show up. But there were 4 that were there that were from New York and Maryland. John Mercer, Luther Martin, Robert Yates, and John Lansing from New York. These 4 guys are the key to understanding what's going on in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. Why? Because these guys left in protest. Now, some of them wrote documents. When they left, 2 of them, John Lansing and Robert Yates, wrote letters to Governor Clinton and told him why we left. You sent us there from New York as delegates. We left in protest because of X, Y, and Z. Luther Martin was asked to give a speech before the Maryland legislature in which he recounted what he saw. So I want to read a little excerpt from from his speech that was recorded. And I want you to see what he saw when he got there. He says this. He talks about the 3 groups that were there. He describes that there's 3 groups of people at the convention. He says this. The famous 3 groups. The result of the reference of the last propositions to the committee was a speedy and hasty determination to reject them. I doubt not, sir, to those who consider them with attention, so sudden a rejection will appear surprising. But it may be proper to inform you that on our meeting in convention, it was found there were among us 3 parties of very different sentiments and views. Now stop right there. This is an eyewitness. This is a guy that is there. You cannot discount what he's saying. You may not agree with what he's saying, David Barton, but you cannot discount it and say, well, the guy wasn't there. He wasn't. He on this day he wrote this, he really wasn't even there. Yes, this guy was a delegate sent from Maryland to the convention to represent Maryland's interests. He gets there and he arrives June 8th or 9th, he says. By the time he gets there, there's a lot of things that have already gone on. Suzanne just referred to one, the secrecy rule, where they passed the secrecy rule. Well, he wasn't even there, and the secrecy rule said, Katie, bar the doors. We're not letting anybody out of here with notes. They can't leave without permission. They cannot correspond without permission from the convention. We ain't telling anybody what's going on in here. Now, people were actually recording what was going on, but you couldn't leave the convention without leaving the building, without leaving your notes behind. What kind of convention is this?
This seems like
they pass a secrecy rule. Everybody shut up about what we're about to do here.
It's like a precursor to the TSA.
Yes.
We're going to get your notes. You're going to be screened before you come in here. And don't you dare pass the door with those prohibited materials.
You know, Suzanne, if we had somebody who could do Photoshop, you know that famous picture of that TSA guy grabbing that guy's crotch? Can you imagine if we had, you know, Luther Martin or, you know, somebody standing up and James Madison?
We'll have to work on that. Yes.
It would get the point. Now, folks, how can you we're bothered by the secrecy in this government right now, right? We just finished talking about the deep state, right? We're all troubled by this deep state that's probably made up of business leaders and the intelligence community. They're snooping around. They're trying to find out secrets about you so they can control you. It was there in 1787, folks. That which is created in darkness behind closed walls always must be suspect. So here in this room is Luther Martin. He arrives June 8th to June 9th in the convention. He's there. He's brought his credentials. He's brought his papers from Maryland. He checks in with James Madison and says, I'm here. I'm representing Maryland's interest. And he discovers right out of the gate there's 3 groups of people there. He goes on to say this about those groups. He says, one party whose object and wish it was to abolish and annihilate all state governments and to bring forward one general government over this extensive continent. Now, he says there's one group there that is clearly there. In his notes, he describes that there's these meetings going on in Independence Hall. Down in the front of the room is this group of guys. They're down there talking. Washington is one of them. They're down there talking about how they are going to annihilate state governments. Now, how can that be proven? Well, once they pass the secrecy rule and then they elect George Washington to be the president of the convention, Edmund Randolph stands up and introduces the Virginia Plan. Now, this goes to motive, right? Because Resolve 6 of the Virginia Plan authorizes the federal government to have the power to veto any state legislation, anything. You cannot deny that that speaks to motive. There was this group that Luther Martin identifies. They're there. They're a group. I don't know how many. He doesn't say. There's 12 of them. There's 18. There's 22 of them. He doesn't say how many they are, but there is this group that they are there to annihilate the states. They see the states as problems. Well, if you want a consolidated government, you're going to try to get that ticket to go to the convention and create a consolidated government. So there was that group there. Let me see. Let me find the second one here.
While you're looking for that, Mark, I want to just touch on again that article detailing Albert J. Knox chapter on Jefferson. He talks about those that drafted the Constitution. There were men representing special economic interests. 4/5 of them were public creditors. 1/3 were land speculators. 1/5 represented interest in shipping, manufacturing, and merchandising. Most of them were lawyers. There's a red flag. Not one of them represented the interest of production. That goes to the very beginning of the conflicts that we had. I refer to them as the Jeffersonian agrarian types. And then the ones that I mentioned that were mentioned in the article, the Hamiltonians that really wanted the monarchy, wanted the states subservient to this whole, like mere corporations of the whole. And that was the financiers, the lawyers, the interests that we also see controlling government right now. As Dr. Ron Paul said, it is no coincidence that with the rise of central banking, we have had the most deadly century in the history of humanity.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Suzanne, and this is where I'm glad we're doing what we're doing. I'm glad we are able to actually talk about this stuff, Suzanne, because for so many years, you know, most people don't even know who Luther Martin is. Most people don't know who the delegates to the convention are, and they're well-meaning people. And folks, when you hear me talk like this with passion, I'm not yelling at you. Don't take it that way. I'm yelling at myself. Why didn't I know this? Why did it took me, let me see, I'm 59, so I was probably 49 before I started to figure this stuff out, because I ran into guys like this, and suddenly questions came into my mind. Well, wait a minute, that's not what I've been told. I've been told that this was nearly a prayer meeting, and out popped the Constitution, that there was near unanimous support. I had no idea that Rhode Island didn't even show up at the convention because they didn't want to be there. They didn't want this new Constitution. Folks, you're listening to me right now, and the reason I'm giving you eyewitness accounts is because I don't want you to email me and say, well, Mark, you're making this stuff up. No, I'm telling you what this guy said, what he spoke before the Maryland legislature, and he gave a report about what he saw going on. Now, you may disagree, and you may say, well, Madison said that's not the way it was going on, and you may find other delegates, but you cannot discount that this guy was an eyewitness, and he's backed up by 3 other guys, by the way. He's not out there on his own. He happens to give a longer speech, and we have a longer record, but there's a lot of guys that are going back to their convention and are going back to their states and saying, Houston, we have a problem over there. It's not just Martin. He just happens to write in a way that makes it easy for radio. Folks, there's a lot that I learned about this summer of 1787 that I just didn't know. So don't get mad at me when I read this stuff, because I'm reading from the guy that was there. I didn't write this. I'm not making this up. So he describes that first group of people that he observed there. These are people that are there because they want to destroy the states. They want to annihilate the states. That's the word he uses. He then goes on to write, the second party was not for the abolition of the state governments, nor for the introduction of a monarchical government under any form, but they wished to establish such a system that could give their own states undue power and influence in the government over the other states. Now, these are called the big 3 states that were there: Pennsylvania, Virginia and Massachusetts. They were the domineering states there. They had the political power, and especially Virginia. Virginia was very willing to wield that power at the convention. And so they wanted to create a kind of a tiered structure. They didn't want to wipe out the states, but they wanted all those other 10 states to realize we call the shots. So it's a kind of monarchy with 3 states governing or ruling or running the other 10 states. So he recognizes that there's this one group that wants to wipe them out. There's another group there that doesn't want to wipe them out, but wants to make them their servants, wants to make the other 10 states their servants. They want to be acknowledged for the size and power of their states. And then he says there was a third party there, what I considered truly federal and Republican. These are the good guys there. This party was nearly equal in number with the other two and was composed of the delegates from Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, in part from Maryland, also some individuals from other representations. These are the guys that are trying to fulfill the great call of the Declaration of Independence, that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. They are there at the convention, and they're making arguments. They're actually standing up on the convention floor, and they're arguing for true federalism, where there isn't a central power that rules the states. They're up there. They're making arguments. Unfortunately, they lost. They didn't win. You'll remember that there were 2 plans. There was a Virginia plan, and then somebody offered the New Jersey plan, which was truly a federal plan, a relationship between the states. It lasted 3 days there, and then it got defeated in some somewhat questionable, in a somewhat questionable manner. There's a lot of questions going on there in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. Now, folks, if you've been fed a narrative about Philadelphia that makes that event a nearly divine event, you're angry at me right now. You're mad at me. You're Kreslins. How can you hate God, and you must hate the Constitution, and you are a traitor? Folks, I've been called all those. In my time, I've been called every bit of it. And some of you might be listening right now and saying, I'm turned. Mabel, turn that radio off. Get that guy and that woman off the radio. We're not listening to them anymore. But you know what? You'll tune back in next week, because you know what I'm telling you right now. In your inner being, you know I'm telling you the truth. Now, truth sometimes is unpleasant. When you're a parent of a child that has a disability, that truth is unpleasant, but you need to hear it. When you might have a health concern and the doctor tells you the truth, it's hard to hear, but you actually need to hear it.
Or when you need to go to the hospital.
Listen, Suzanne, I was building to a big crescendo there, all right? And you just robbed me of it.
Can I interject here?
No, go ahead.
It's really interesting. During your conversation on Facebook, Mark, you were doing a straw argument, and that history is an opinion. And I really loved that post. And in that, you had our good friend Andrew Avery, who called in the other day, and who's always messaging Suzanne while we're on air. And keep doing it, Andrew. We love it. Please do it. He asked about sources. And I showed you this before the show, and I'll put it up here for the YouTube viewers. They can see the cover. This is the records of the Federal Convention of 1787, and it's a 4-volume set. This had to be a used volume I bought very, very inexpensively online. And it is if you go to a certain day, like here today, you have the notes of Hamilton on that day. And then right behind the notes of Hamilton on that day, you have Patterson giving his notes of that day, what was discussed and what was voted in favor of and what was voted down. And then that day you'll keep going. And after Patterson, there's Wilson. Wilson gives his notes of that day. So this is a historical record of what happened in Philadelphia during the summer of 1787. And right in here, Lansing And Robert Yates, there's a notation in here. They left the convention on June 16th, 1787, because they were done with this whole thing. They went back and wrote a letter to Governor Clinton of New York and said, defeat this. This thing is awful. I'm paraphrasing there. I'm sorry I interrupted, but I wanted to make sure I got this book out there. For those of you on the radio, it is the records of the Federal Convention of 1787, a 4-volume set. You can get it probably on Amazon.
You know, Mark, earlier you referred to the convention. I talk a lot about words having meaning, and we use a lot of times we're subjected to improper uses of words to inadequately describe historic events. So the convention was really a coup. Our Revolutionary War was really a war for American independence. They were really trying to conserve their traditional rights as Englishmen. Revolutionary War was really what we saw, what happened in France. The other thing, too, that we're huge victims of, and we're seeing, again, now with this disaster of a movie out by D'Souza, is the terminology, the Civil War. A civil war is when 2 or more factions compete to rule or lead a geopolitical entity. That isn't what happened. The Confederated States of America sought to leave. They seceded. They had every right to do so. Read this article, the what is it called? The Death of Historical Accuracy. We'll put that up on our page if you have not seen that. But you know, we're lied to when we use these improper terms. It sets the stage in our minds to assume that certain stories we're being told have credibility. One example I talk about, Tom Mullen, who was actually, you know, when we talk about, oh, this happened a couple 100 years ago, who cares? We do what we have to do today. But this goes to the issue of consent. To which type of government did we consent? Not what we have today. In fact, the direct opposite. Kevin Gutzman was quoted as saying, at no time did the people consent to this omnipotent power of the federal judiciary. We never consented to allowing federal judges to rule our lives. Yet that's what we have, and we embrace it. I quote my friend from the afternoon show on K-Talk. We need the Supreme Court to tell us what the law of the land is so we don't have fighting in the streets. Folks, that's why we have fighting in the streets. That's why we are counting 60 million babies murdered and counting. People say, well, abortion isn't murder. Well, you know, once upon a time, I wore my lawyer hat and had my lawyer goggles on to see the world. And no, the legal definition of murder is the unlawful killing of one human being by another. So when you get megalomaniacs saying killing the most defenseless member of our society is not murder, it's a medical procedure, you have to go to a different definition of murder. That is what is not only the biblical definition of murder, because you can be a secularist, an atheist, and still believe that this is a barbaric procedure. What is the moral and ethical definition? To cut apart a baby with medical tools, pull it out piece by piece, limb by limb, and say, well, we're going to give anesthesia to babies over 20 weeks. A baby developing in the womb, a newborn baby, a toddler, are all developing. I had a person describe to me, the one on the thread where actually, you know, resulted in my sentence in the Facebook penitentiary, said, well, a baby at some point stops being a clump of cells when it has its own experience and memories. Holy cow! When do we get started? What's your earliest recollection, Mark? I think I can go to 3 years old. So by that definition, what about when you start losing your memories? What about the patients with dementia? My mom has advanced Parkinson's. Going by Rahm Emanuel's brother's definitions here, when human beings are referred to as units, and whether or not we're going to provide them with medical care, because now this is all under the auspices of the government. At what point do people stop being human beings? We become units, and it is okay to kill them, murder them, whatever you call them. But this is a problem when we have a general government that has thrown off its restraints. They have lied about the narrative. We're seeing that now. And look at the people that conservatives turn to, who are cheering this movie on. You've got the Mark Levins, I don't know about Rush Limbaugh, but all these on Fox News, Sean Hannity, all these people are going on and saying what a wonderful movie this is. Abraham Lincoln did not end slavery. He did not go to war to end or abolish slavery. He went to war to collect a tax from the South to benefit crony capitalists, friends of the Republican Party in the North. Folks, stop pointing at the Democrats. It was the party of Lincoln, the Republicans, that destroyed what we have. Stop going with this labels back and forth, because you really don't know what you're talking about when you want to blame the Democrats. Andrew Wilkow, I used to like him. He used to be more like Mike Church back in the day. Now he's more like Mark Levin. Say, go ahead, tear down statues of Democrats. We don't care. These Democrats were the Jeffersonians. If you don't like that we have abortion foisted upon us, if you don't like that gay marriage is foisted upon every state in the union, if you don't like the gun control, you can thank Lincoln and the party of Lincoln for what we have today and the 14th Amendment. I'm going to be getting into that in my episode on Case in Point when I discuss the McDonald case, where Justice Antonin Scalia, our conservative, our originalist, incorporated the Second Amendment against the states. This goes back to the convention, Mark, or the coup, as we should call it, where this was rejected outright. They threatened to shut the doors on Madison. So this is what we have to understand, the true history. Here's a disclaimer, no financial affiliation with Liberty Classroom, but we do have a discount available to our listeners. Go to libertyclassroom.org or .com. When you get there and you want to purchase a membership, basic membership will go from $89 to $49 when you use the code CRN for Cerberus Radio Network. Speaking of secession and federalism, Mark, I want to have time. There's an event in Dallas going on. I'm going to let you wrap up the show and share this event, because I think I'm going to hop on a plane or drive or something. Gosh, I hate traveling on an airplane.
Oh, no, I do too. Well, yeah, there is some, and this goes back to my earlier point, folks. There's a freedom that's coming to even discuss these real serious political tools that can be used by the people of the states. Start getting that concept wedded into your mind. You are part of the people of the states. It's a great event going to be held down in Dallas, Texas on November 10th from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. that afternoon. The topic is going to be secession of the 15 states from the Soviet Union in 1991. Did you know that? Did you know that 15 states in the Soviet Union seceded? Folks, secession and decentralizing movements are flourishing right now around the globe. We need to be part of that. I want you to join me and Suzanne. Jeff, I hope you can make it down here to Dallas, Texas on November 10th from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. You need to be part of this, because you need to learn the truth. Because as Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. It is very disturbing. Thomas Hobbes, a philosopher from the 1500s, observed and described the phenomena that he believed was true, that man in a state of nature will naturally war with himself. They'll steal from each other. They'll rob each other. They'll rape and murder each other without government. Sadly, folks, we have become Hobbesian in our thinking. We actually think that without 23rd and Lincoln, which is our state government here, or without Washington, D.C., we're going to revert to murdering, pillaging, raping, and murdering each other. Folks, that is a lie, an outright lie that the megalomaniacs spill out to you every day, that without us, you'll rape, murder, and kill each other. You'll steal from each other. But we're here to stop you from doing that.
Keep you safe. We like our safety. Freedom, not so much.
Yeah, but the reality is we all transact voluntarily every single day of the week. Guys, folks, friends, don't believe the lie. Stay tuned to what we're doing here on the Cerberus Radio Networks. Folks, we got some great shows coming up. Got a big announcement coming up. we're busting through, folks. We're breaking through, and we're glad you joined us here today. Until we meet again here soon in the near term, I'm Mark. She is Suzanne. You all have a great rest of the day.
Bye, everybody.
All right.